The corridor outside the ICU at Juntendo Hospital buzzed with the kind of tense quiet you get when everyone's got too much to say but too many reasons not to speak. But my family was never much good at silence. My mother's voice, sharp as glass, sliced the hush. So, she said, not bothering to lower her voice, Yuto wants to throw away his education, play violin like some street performer. What is this, a joke? White rectangle lights reflected in the polished floor, tracing the scuffed tips of my old shoes. The walls here always felt too close. Sometimes I thought the lack of windows was strategic, so there was nowhere to look but at your own failures, floating in the antiseptic air. My father pressed into the seat next to her, gave a short, strangled exhale. He didn't look up from the envelope he'd been nervously folding and unfolding since my grandmother, his mother, had been admitted for a collapsed lung. Yuto, he said, voice tired, there's no living in that, not here, that's fantasy. I swallowed. I'll audition for Toho, I said quietly. After that I can get scholarships maybe. Who's going to pay for lessons? Who's going to let you waste your time? My uncle, visiting from Chiba, looked at me with a crooked half grin. When I was your age, I put all my money into pachinko. You know what it taught me. When odds are stacked against you, you walk away. My sister Mariko leaned against the wall and picked at her nail. She glanced at me a little softer, but her mouth pressed closed like she couldn't risk the possible hope in her voice. How many classical musicians does anyone actually know? She murmured, humiliation strung hot in my ears. Behind the hospital doors, my grandmother was struggling to breathe, while out here, my dreams were being suffocated for sport. I met my mother's gaze finally. You wanted me to be honest, I said. I'm being honest. What about your duty? She said, voice rising as a nurse passing by turned her head. You think you can just drift through life with your music? She picked up her phone and scrolled. I'm tired, Yuto, just do your job, get promoted at work, settle down, this isn't America. This isn't Europe. I felt like I was being x-rayed, stripped down until only my foolishness was left. A creak of rubber-soled shoes, the doctor appeared and called us in. The family shifted its scrutiny from me to her and the corridor briefly lost its sting. That was 7 years ago. Patience is not resignation, though when you bear enough weight, the world stops seeing the difference. I worked days in an office in Shibuya, fed formulas into computers, watched staplers empty and refill, all while the city pulsed just beyond the glass. At night, I filled my ears with music so my mind could survive, saving coins for lessons with a retired violinist in Setagaya who smoked menthols and once played backup for Seiji Ozawa. She let me use her battered old violin when I couldn't afford repairs for mine. Shoji-sensei laughed the first time I played batch. Too polite, you play like you're apologizing, she said, as smoke curled toward the cracked window. If you're going to be rejected, at least do it for being too much, not too little. But it's hard to be too much when every step outside is another chorus of reminders, when you can hear your mother's voice on the phone, be happier if you stopped dreaming, Yuto. Yet night after night, I crawled up the narrow stairs to her apartment, fingers aching, and played until the neighbors banged on the walls or until Shoji-san fell asleep in her rocking chair. She got old slowly then quickly until there were nights when I tuned her violin and played just for the cat, and then when even the cat was gone for myself. When Toho rejected my first application, my mother said nothing but left a cup of cold barley tea on my desk. Just think about it, she wrote in a note, before you waste any more time. By the time I was 26, the idea of leaving, of putting down the violin, had settled in my bones like rain-soaked wood. I could have stopped. I had steady pay, friends from the office who sometimes invited me for drinks, a room of my own, and all the silence of a city built from other people's ambitions. But I couldn't put the instrument away. It was almost an accident, the orchestra audition. Shoji-san passed away in the spring. I played Ave Maria at her tiny funeral, hands trembling, and afterward her lawyer pressed a faded envelope into my palm. Inside was a note, a photograph of her waving on stage next to Ozawa, and an old application slip to the Tokyo City Chamber Orchestra. In the note she'd written, "If you're going to fail, fail with sound." I applied only because the routine was too heavy to break. The interview room was cramped and bright, the examiners bored-looking. I didn't even have proper tails. I wore a black suit, sleeves a bit too short, and tried to remember Shoji's laughter as I lifted the bow. When I finished, there was a silence more profound than hostility, a stillness that didn't reject. Months later, when the acceptance letter arrived, I sat on the tatami and blinked at my name typed next to first violin, substitute. I cried quietly in the dark, just a little, no one saw. The years between then and now slipped past in a blur of rehearsals, practice, sore fingers, fast commutes, the muted thrill of applause, and the slow but building certainty that I wasn't a child anymore. We played in Tokyo Station, in Suntory Hall, on stages above hundreds of faces, never famous, just persistent, slowly building a name in the small world of Japanese chamber music. I started teaching small classes in Hongo, then a weekend school for nervous kids with parents more supportive than mine had ever been. Sometimes at the end of a performance, I'd catch that rare, stunned silence before applause and know that someone out there understood. Reporters started calling after a YouTube video from a Suntory Hall performance went a little viral. The orchestra's manager wrote my bio for the English press, self-taught from a humble family in Komagome, champion of persistence. It became a sort of shield, a narrative I could step inside. Through it all, my family was distant. Birthdays, New Year's, a stray congratulatory text when the Osaka Chamber hired me to lead a Shostakovich suite. My parents never came, not once. Too busy, father's not well, classical music isn't for us, that's all. I stopped inviting, but then last spring Mariko called. My mother was sick, stomach cancer, bad. She needed treatment and Mariko couldn't handle the bills alone. You're doing well, aren't you? She said, not quite asking, so I sent money. My apartment was small and my violin case banged against the stove every morning, but Tokyo rents are high and their gratitude wasn't. Still, in the background for the first time in years, I heard them talking about me again. Maybe it's not useless what he's doing, Mariko had said, when I stopped by the hospital with new pajamas for my mother. She turned her head from the bed, refusing to meet my eyes, the old defiance still burning under the surface sickness. I kept my visits short, smiles were scarce, and every time I left the ward my stomach felt hollow, old wounds smarting around the edges. The corridors were just as narrow as I remembered. The call came in November, Mariko, voice thin, she's not doing well, you should come. I stood outside the hospital, violin case slung over my shoulder. The city was purple with sunset, towers glowing, traffic undulating in gentle waves. Inside, the old arguments hovered just under the hospital roof. This time, my father just nodded as I entered. He looked smaller, lost in a cardigan too big for him. It's good you're here, he said, eyes on the floor. My mother, propped up by pillows, turned as I walked in. You cut your hair, she said stiffly. I smiled, set the violin against the wall, wary as always. It's easier for concerts. She nodded, lips pale and pressed thin. The TV played an old drama in the corner, sound almost off. For a while, the only sound was the beep-beep cadence of the heart monitor and the distant scratch of sneakers in the hall. At last, my father asked, "You still play then?" I met his eyes and nodded. Every week at Suntory Hall sometimes. Last month we played Debussy. He grunted, unsure, lost in a world beyond symphonies. My mother said nothing, and I wondered if she remembered the argument out here, on almost this exact spot 7 years earlier. I wanted her to say something, anything that acknowledged the chasm between what I'd been and what I had managed to build. She turned away instead. You sent too much money, she said. It's for you. A silence. She fingered the hospital blanket as if she could smooth out regret. Doctors said it's worse now. Maybe I should have listened to you more, she said very quietly. I waited, a knot twisting in my chest. That night I walked the empty corridor from her room and sat outside on the curb under the fluorescent hospital sign. The city moved beyond the glass, untouchably normal. In the hush, I realized something had shifted. My family's approval was no longer currency I needed to spend. Still, the scar hurt. A month later, the orchestra's publicity officer called me at midnight. Remember that interview with NHK, she said. They want you to do a featured performance, live broadcast. Your family, do they still live in Komagome? The world narrowed. I stared at my reflection in the window. They do. Why? There's a segment, Tokyo Stories. They want to shoot part at your family home. Think it over. I said yes against every instinct to keep my life away from theirs. Arguments resumed. We're not actors, my mother said on the phone, voice thin with chemo and pride. It's important, Mariko insisted. You never came to any of his concerts, at least do this. Let them film in the living rooms. My father sighed, the exhausted sound of a man running out of arguments. If you want. The crew came in January. I stood awkwardly in the old tatami room, surrounded by photos of a younger, sterner family. The producer asked me to play something for the cameras. My mother insisted on staying in the kitchen, but my father sat just behind the cameraman, silent as always. I played Batch, the same sonata Shoji-san once accused me of playing too timidly. But here, with the world's eye peering in, I poured every humiliation and patience into the bow, every tremor of longing, and every moment I'd wanted to storm out and never look back. By the end, I was shaking. My father looked at his shoes, tears quietly slipping down his face, old shame or pride, I couldn't tell. The crew packed up and left, the house strangely empty. My mother called me later that night, voice hesitant but clear. Yuto, she said, you played well, you made this house proud. There was a pause, long and thin as thread. I used to want you to be practical, but I didn't see the size of your heart. The broadcast was scheduled for March. My mother insisted she didn't care. Mariko watched the promotional clips, sent me screenshots. They're using your photo everywhere, wait and see. In the weeks leading up, text messages began trickling in. He's really doing it, an aunt wrote. When is it broadcast? The family WhatsApp, silent for years, revived. My father joked to his neighbors that his son was on TV. The broadcasts went up on banners in Ueno Station. I walked by one and touched my own image, small and self-conscious. March 12. After days of nerves, I waited backstage at NHK Hall, dozens of faces hidden behind the curtain. The producer pressed an earpiece into my hand. If your family wants to come, we have seats reserved. We'll film some reaction shots. I called Mariko. I can't promise anything, she said. She's tired. But as I stepped out under the hot circle of lights, I saw them. My mother, frail but upright, her scarf carefully tied. My father beside her, stiff as discipline. Mariko in a sensible suit. Even my skeptical uncle was there, peering up as if trying to see the trick behind the magician's sleeve. The hall faded to darkness. The host spoke. Yuto Mori, first violin of Tokyo City Chamber Orchestra, son of Komagome. And then the music began. I played Shostakovich, the same suite I'd once been paid not to play, the piece I'd practiced secretly in hospital stairwells because it was too passionate, too irregular for family tastes. My hands moved almost by themselves. There was no space for humiliation or patience now, only the opening of sound into a room suddenly hushed by belief. Movement by movement, I saw faces in the crowd soften, the rigid neighbor from across the street, the teacher who'd once chided me for practicing instead of studying, my uncle trying not to look moved. My mother sat still, hands clasped, tears shining in the bright TV light. When the orchestra ended, a vast intake of breath shuddered through the crowd, and then applause, wave after wave, rolling forward. The cameras panned to my family, who did not hide. My mother stood unsteady and clapped until her hands shook. Backstage, she pressed my hand with fingers papery thin. You did it, Yuto, she said. I was wrong. We hugged, wordless. For the first time, there was no bitterness between us. That night, Komagome was lit with festival lanterns. Neighbors set them out for the NHK boy. People clapped as I walked through the old shopping street. A man from the Yamman's stand bowed. We remember you practicing by the river. You made us proud, Ni. I went home, my real home now, a room filled with sheet music and a violin case scuffed up by 1,000 late-night trains. I sat on my bed and called Shoji-san's daughter to tell her about the program. I listened to my family's messages fill up my phone, the voices once so dismissive now turned to awe. None of it erased the years of rejection, nor the sting of humiliation in the hospital corridor, nor the way patients had sometimes felt like slow erasure. But as I lifted my violin to play in the dark, I understood that redemption isn't being proven right as much as being witnessed, truly seen, by the same eyes that once looked away. Outside, Tokyo shimmered, an endless city of doubters and dreamers, patient loners, and those who learned to return finally not for approval, but to share the music they made in spite of everything. And that was enough.